During the late 1800s and early 1900s, the first wave of the feminist movement began. Primarily, women fought for the right to vote worldwide. However, females were denied many rights that men had and were seen as second-class citizens. This set off the start of a movement that changed the social, economic and political power of women in history forever. In 1939 to 1945, Europe, the USA and many other nations fought in the Second World War. Women worked during the war, giving them confidence and independence. In 1945, 4/5 of American war workers said they would like to continue working after the war. Governments and ordinary men demanded that their women stay home. The same year, in Britain, Barbara Castle was first elected. In 1949, Simone de Beauvoir published The Second Sex, which talked about the oppression of women and that history, myth and literature reinforced the idea that women were the inferior sex. It was banned by the Catholic Church later that year. During the late 1940s and 1950s, political leaders and other women were told that it was their duty to provide a home for returning war heroes and produce children to rebuild the post-war world. In the 1950s, women at home were encouraged to develop feminine skills, like flower arranging and knitting. Books and comics for children depicted boys and girls very differently. Girls were timid and scared easily, and it was assumed they would only be interested in clothes, ballet, ponies and stories about groups of school friends. Boys were strong, brave and adventurous, and were only interested in books about soldiers, explorers and sport. In 1950, violence against women was made illegal for most of the Western world. Contraception was legal in most of Europe and America, although only married women could buy it easily. In 1952, men who ran US television companies introduced strict rules about dress code for women. 1959, Barbie dolls were first sold. Her shape was, and still is, very unnatural, and originally her tiny feet were always on tiptoes so she could wear high heels. In 1960, 1/3 of women worked in the USA. During the 1960s, many women who had married and tried to live up to the ideal social expectation of them developed depression, eating disorders, or alcoholism. In the 1960s and the 1970s, women hoped to change the way people thought about them. More women went to college and university than ever before in history. In 1961, the first contraceptive pills were made. They had dangers and side effects, but were reliable compared to earlier methods. Women could for the first time control how many children they had and when. In 1963, American writer Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, which sparked women to think about the 1950s, where women had been tricked into accepting a view of how they should be. But this view was invented by men. Betty Friedan says, "The problem, which has no name, is simply the fact that American women are kept from growing to their full capacities." In 1964, the American Civil Rights Act stated that jobs be equally open to women and men of all races. The following year, positive discrimination became legal in the USA, which means that women were chosen over men for jobs whenever possible. In 1966, America's National Organization of Women was formed. It was the start of many similar groups in Europe and the USA. When companies treated women unfairly, they took them to court. In the USA, Shirley Chisholm became the first African American woman elected to Congress. In 1969, California introduced the first no-fault divorces. Britain reformed in the same year. Until the 1970s, most married women in America and Europe took their husband's name after marriage. Feminists decided not to change their names when married and also protested about the title Mrs., as men were not required to change their Mr. title. They used Miss instead. Words such as mankind were objected to, and feminists preferred all-encompassing neutral words such as humanity. In 1970, The Female Eunuch was published by Australian scholar Germaine Greer. The book criticised men's attitude to women and changed the way women thought about themselves and their role in society. In 1971, the first refuges for women were opened in Britain and the USA. Women and children were able to escape from violent men. They provided medical care, legal advice, and helped them find new homes. 250 more refuges opened in the USA over the next 10 years. A British male judge in 1988 said, "Women are entitled to dress attractively, to be friendly with casual acquaintances and still say no at the end of an evening without being brutally assaulted." In 1971 and 1972, feminist magazines in America and Britain discussed topics that women thought were important. Instead of household-related hints and sewing patterns, they included articles on careers and equal pay. In 1974, in the USA, women held 16 out of 580 seats in Congress. By 1997, they held 62. In Britain, by 1997, 120 women held seats out of 650 in Parliament. The Sex Discrimination Act of 1975 made it illegal to treat women differently from men in jobs, education, or housing. In the 1980s, more than half of women worked but were never paid as much as men. Governments also encouraged teachers to give girls extra help to study maths and science so they could have more careers to choose from. In 1990, women in the US only earned about 2/3 as much as men. Women's pay was thought of as pocket money, and men were still the family breadwinners. In 1991, young American feminist Naomi Wolf published The Beauty Myth. It raised questions about the relationship between modern Western ideals of beauty and eating disorders. In the 1990s, the beginning of third-wave feminism, or post-feminism, emerged. It embraced diversity and change, but unlike the first and second wave, it did not have an all-encompassing idea. In 1994, British all-female pop groups, the Spice Girls, formed. This is one aspect of girl power, giving women role models and creating a more proactive female market within consumerist society. Although critics argue that girl power is just a media creation, in 1997 the most popular girl power show ever was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Another was Xena Warrior Princess. These developments are the direct legacy of the women's movement. The effect of strong female role models for young women is a huge social shift on the way society once viewed women. Before, women were only mothers and housewives. Now they could be anything they wanted to be and were free to dream of a future they wanted. From 1945 to the year 2000, the oppression on women's position in social, political and economic areas of life was gradually lifted, as women fought for what was rightfully theirs. The hard work done throughout those years paid off, and women today are enjoying the freedom brought by the feminist movement.